Lynn Ramsey has a new film coming out, an adaptation of the book We Need to Talk About Kevin, and it is, for my money, one of the very best films I've seen this year. It's an extraordinarily sensitive and well-judged adaptation of a very, very difficult book. It's got a fantastic central performance by Tilda Swinton, really interesting use of music, very arresting visuals, and I would say near flawless direction by Lynn Ramsey. Now, I'm a huge Lynn Ramsey fan, always have been. Her first feature, Ratcatcher, really caught my attention when I saw it at Edinburgh. I interviewed her and I was really impressed by her. Her second film, Morven Caller, another book adaptation, I was convinced was going to be a huge hit. I told her so, and I remember being very surprised that it didn't turn out to be the success it should have been. I've never quite figured out why more people didn't take Morven Caller to their heart. Well, the strangest thing about We Need to Talk About Kevin is it's only Lynn Ramsey's third feature. There's been a huge gap between Morven Caller and this. Why? Well, for many years, Lynn Ramsey was trying to get together an adaptation of The Lovely Bones, which, as I'm sure you know, was finally brought to the screen by Peter Jackson in a version which, at the most charitable assessment, has to be seen as severely flawed. For me, the problem with the Jackson version was that it was far too literal, it was far too visually complicated, it looked to some extent like Super Mario Galaxy, and that kind of undercut the tragedy of the story. Yet Ramsey tried so hard and struggled for such a long time to get that movie together. I always wondered in the back of my mind, what would her version have been like? Would it have been more inventive? Would it have been more successful? Would she actually have somehow found a way of putting that almost impossible book onto the screen? And part of me thinks yes, but part of me thinks no, there's a reason it never happened. The reason is that was just an impossible story to tell. And it started me thinking about all the other pet projects that directors whose work I really admire never managed to get off the ground. I mean, most famously, I think Stanley Kubrick worked for years and years on Napoleon, the great unmade film that he was always building up to. He always had it in his mind, this was the thing he was going to do, never did. Orson Welles dreamed of doing Don Quixote, as indeed did Terry Gilliam. In fact, there's a whole film about Terry Gilliam's failure to make The Man Who Shot Don Quixote. That's called Lost in La Mancha. And the last I heard, in fact, Terry Gilliam was back on, once again, having another bash at that project. Many of you will be aware that Alfred Hitchcock dreamed of doing an adaptation of Hamlet with Cary Grant in the lead role. All cult film fans at some point come to the subject of Ronnie Rocket, the great unmade David Lynch film. It was going to come after Eraserhead. It was going to be better, stranger, weirder, more experimental, and yet never happened, although many of the ideas from it, I think, did filter through into things like Twin Peaks' Fire Walk With Me. Of course, Lynch ended up making Dune, a very, very flawed adaptation of Dune. But before that, Alejandro Jodorowsky had started work on Dune. And I think many people feel the same way about the Jodorowsky Dune as I do about the Peter Jackson Lovely Bones. It would have been so much better if the first team had actually got that film made. And then, of course, there's the whole issue of Alien 3. I mean, the Fincher version is all over the place. We understand it was recut, never been properly reconstructed. But before the Fincher version, there was the Vincent Ward version. You know, the wooden planet in space. Wouldn't you have loved to see that? So here's my question to you. What is the greatest unmade film? The film that a director dreamed of making, had a vision of making, had an ambition to make, and yet somehow never got to complete. What's the great unmade film? And while you're contemplating it, make sure you make time to put a date in your diary to see the new Lynn Ramsey. She never got to make Lovely Bones, but believe me, the wait for We Need to Talk About Kevin has been worth it.
Is it? You've decided.
Eva, there's nothing left to decide. It already happened.
Need a drink of water.
Hey, Kev. Listen, buddy, it's easy to misunderstand something when you hear it out of context.
Why would I not know the context? I am the context.